Hello, hello. Oh, the 2 Points. Hello, thank you and welcome. Thank you very much. And Merry Christmas to all of you. Welcome to this very festive edition of the TooFatLardies Oddcast. Here we are coming to you in the heart of the festive season with my two very good friends and special guests, Richard Clark and Nick Skinner. Gentlemen, welcome to the Christmas Oddcast.
Yeah, you can't get more heart of the festive season than Christmas Day itself.
Ho, 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 everyone. Happy Christmas.
Yes, very happy Christmas to all our listeners. Really lovely to have you join us on this, the big day.
So you're gathering with us at Lard Island on Christmas Day itself, quite a special day in the calendar. But before we unwrap all of our Lard Island Christmas presents, gentlemen, guys, what have you been doing through the heart of the Advent season? We've all been listening, I'm sure, to the Advent windows. We've all been recording. But what else have you been up to?
I've been smashing my head on a radiator and getting concussion.
Repeatedly.
Yeah. It's my new hobby. It's better than wargaming.
And how is the concussion? You're looking hale and hearty, I've got to say. I was expecting to see blood spatters and wounds and bandages, but I don't see any of that.
No, it was like a murder scene, actually. There was a whole blood spray pattern up the wall, out the back of my head. It was quite gory, and my wife was not very impressed. It was pretty, but yeah, so I'm kind of getting there. Apparently it's going to take me up to 8 weeks to recover. But I'm gonna have a couple of glasses of wine with dinner today, and we'll see how that goes. I've been off the sauce since the event, so today's the giant leap for man.
I think you should tell your wife, Richard, that the goose fat is for the potatoes, not to be put on the bottom 3 steps of the stairs. I saw her doing it. I saw it.
It was the 3rd step that I done.
It's always the 3rd step.
Yeah.
Well, I told you this statistic, didn't I? 1 in 953 people in the UK die as a consequence of falling down the stairs.
So that was kind of you to phone me in the hospital to tell me that.
Yeah, I phoned it up 952 people first.
And are there any blood spatters in your house, Nick? I mean, hopefully not a concussion.
Not yet, but the day is still young, Sid, and with all the kids returning from various parts of the country, it's highly likely by the end of Boxing Day. I've been staying on my own 2 feet mostly during Christmas, which is always the best way to enjoy it. And I went to the pantomime, Sid, and you were brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for the tickets. Dolly was the name of the pantomime dame in the show at Harpenden in the Eric Morecambe Hall or Memorial Centre or Parade Ground or whatever it's called. And yeah, you were brilliant, mate. Really, really good. I loved the dresses, the outfits, darling. They were amazing. You stole the show.
No, not on Prestatyn this year, Sid.
No, I had an offer from Prestatyn and one from Scarborough, but I decided to stay closer to home. And to be honest, the crinoline and the frills were difficult to transport in my car. So I went just with somewhere closer to home. It helped transportation enormously. So I'm pleased you had a good evening. I did see you out there over the limelight. But yes, good. I'm glad you and the family had a great time.
I know they didn't.
we did enjoy it. You shot me with your water pistol, which was always makes me chuckle.
Right. Wonderful.
Moving quickly on.
Have you actually done any wargaming? Oh, is this just a podcast about blood spatter and forensic science and pantomimes?
Yes, I am, and actually, I'm in the middle of a top secret Kriegspiel at the moment. In fact, that's being run over Discord. I am playing a part in an Andy Crow run Kriegspiel, which is at this very moment unfolding. In fact, let me just check to see that there isn't anything that I need to be thinking about at the moment. But he's doing a Kriegspiel based on the early war antics of German surface raiders. So it's a really nice naval theme.
So This is quite topical, isn't it? Because it is obviously close to the time of the year in which the Graf Spey was cornered down in Montevideo. I assume that's part of the genesis for the project.
Yeah, I think so. And Andy's obviously been inspired by something that's tickled his fancy. And do you know what? It's been a really interesting process. We're only a few days into it, but already, as so often with Krieg Spiels, the thing that comes up so early on is logistics. Logistics, how do you sail halfway around the world and back again, and make sure you've got enough fuel to still get where you want to go after that? And what happens if you can't rendezvous with with your tanker, etc., all this kind of stuff is really interesting. When you start to work out distances and sailing speeds, and it's really quite challenging, which it should be.
Interesting, though, isn't it? It just shows that there's no one tool in the wargaming box. There are different tools that do different jobs in different ways, and it's a case of getting the right game is a case of selecting the right tool to do that job. And sometimes a Kriegspiel can be so much more than a tabletop game. At other times, tabletop games are exactly the tool you want to use, but it just shows that Kriegspiels can do things that other beers cannot reach, the parts that other beers cannot reach, as somebody once said.
And also how just doing one game could inspire you for others. So, I said to Andy said he was doing a Kriegspiel. I said, yeah, I'd love to play that. He gave me the subject matter, which made me then reach for my Atlantic Chase game, board game out of the garage, and I played that the other night to try and refamiliarize myself with how that worked, and that set my mind thinking on some ideas that we need to talk about and go commando, Rich. So one thing leads to another.
Can I just say, it must be lovely for you to be invited to take part in that game. Must be really nice to get that message saying, would you like to take part in this game, Nick?
It was lovely. It was lovely to receive that message personally.
Yeah, must have been lovely. I can't imagine what that would feel like.
No, I can't imagine.
From Dagenham.
Yeah, but maybe if you stop trying to demolish your house with your head, you probably would be in a better space to do it.
It must have been great. I've long been interested in all of those South Atlantic logistics. So thanks a lot, Reg. Recreating Coronel and the Falklands and the Graf Spey incident. The logistics are really interesting of all of that, especially with the German squadron which goes down in the First World War. But thanks a lot, Reg. Great friend. Christmas card possibly may still be in the post.
And great contributor to Lard magazine as well, of course, which has also been what I've been doing mostly over the last 4 weeks, is putting the monster together. TooFatLardies is officially the publisher of the world's largest war games magazine. Eat your heart out, Mr. Bowers Towers. We've got the whopper, because the Lard magazine was the biggest one that we've ever produced. 260 pages filled with goodness. Lots of interesting things in there, including from Andy Crow, AWI scenario, which is quite interesting for 1777, and an O group game for an American attack in Normandy. Stuff in there that's going to stimulate over the festive period. And I know lots of people would have got their hands on it already. So I hope you're wading through it and enjoying it and spotting the typos, because I'm sure there are plenty. I know there are plenty. There always are.
I have to apologise for that, in as much as normally Nick and I do the editing together, and if I edit something, I pass it on to him to read, and if he edits something, he passes it on to me to read. But unfortunately, this year Nick had to carry the burden on his own, because I've got Lard magazine, but I haven't been able to read it yet because my the doctor said don't read anything. So that's entirely my fault if there are any errors in there, because I was absent without a pass.
But there's some real highlights for each in there as well. We've got Old's Novik Chain of Command, pint-sized campaign for the Hertgenveld, just round the corner from where we walked a few years ago, which is really inspiring and interesting. We've got a lovely piece in there about the French-Indian Wars and the by Lawrence Burroughs, which is a big thing for sharp practice. Lots of content for Strength and Honor, including a piece from Mark Backhouse on how to slaughter a goat and have better fortune in your war games, about portents, omens of victory, and all that kind of stuff. Some things about night fighting. Bag the Hun is in there again. Jim Jackerman as given us some excellent ideas for scenarios for South African Air Force versus the Italians, which is really exciting. It's just endless. It just goes on and on and on. And so would I if you let me. So I'll stop.
Good point.
And that's available from the usual place on the Lard Island website. But I think also it's available, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, from Caravanserai as well. They seem to have that on their website, I think.
Yeah, I think if you're in the Euroland, you can get it from them. It's also on the TooFatLardies website, as indeed is 20 years of back catalogue as well. So it's great that Derek up in Scotland has updated already his index. There's an index of contents of all the specials and Lard magazines that goes back to the first one. I think the first one was in 2004, was it?
It was 2004 summer special.
Yeah, so there's been loads of stuff passed by under the bridge since then. So if you're interested in getting your hands on some of that old goodness, then you can do that too.
So great service there from Jasper and Guy over at Caravanserai, and from Derek up in Musselburgh. I must say that the index is really useful. Thank you so much, Derek, for keeping that up to date. But enough of this, enough of blood spatters and enough of the graph spay. So I thought what we could do today, guys, was just have a chat about some of the really interesting things coming over from the Advent windows. If anyone's not been able to listen to them yet, they are all available on the TooFatLardies YouTube channel. There will, by the time you're hearing this, be all of the windows, all 24 of them, in which each of us did 8 windows on 8 different questions throughout the course of December. Now, we didn't share our thoughts in advance. I recorded all of mine in November, and I think both of you recorded yours in early December as well. So we didn't pre-discuss them in advance, although I think possibly you might have had a sneak peek at a couple of mine, Richard, because I know you referenced those in a couple of your Advent windows.
Well, I have to edit them. So and sometimes with the way it's been this month, I edit yours before I've done some of mine. So I did check on a couple of yours because I thought, oh, I wonder what would happen if I came up with the same answers as Sid. So yeah, you did. You're right. There were a couple of points where I had a sneak preview.
Very good. So there were loads of things which were coming out which we hadn't discussed in advance. Did you have any standout thoughts? And I'm not thinking about the war films that we went through, but there was certainly some good discussions on things like the bird's eye view of the table, some of the issues relating to complex rules. And I really enjoyed the one I recorded, I have to say, about night fighting, which I think both of you kind of picked up obliquely in talking about Go Commando and some of the challenges in recreating the chaos and opportunities of night fighting with things like the LRDG.
Would you say, Sid, you say you really enjoyed that one, would you say that if you were to vote on which was the best Advent window, it would be one of your own?
Well, modesty dictates that I can't actually say that. But however, I couldn't blame anyone for voting that way, should they wish to do so.
Well, it's interesting, actually, because being serious, that when I listened to that, it actually, we had a bit of a flurry of discussion over our WhatsApp group that we have between us, talking about night fighting, because I thought you identified some really interesting ideas in there, not seeing night fighting as a negative factor, but also seeing it as an opportunity, and seeing it as a completely different environment. Night determined the fact that you might be in the same place, but the environment was totally different. And that, I thought that was really illuminating, and there were some great ideas in that have had us talking, and especially with thoughts for what a commando, for Go Commando, but also the fact that I think there's quite a few ideas in there that could retrospectively be applied to chain of command. So yeah, I thought that was a really good discussion. I love the idea that it provides opportunity and it increases the drama and the excitement and the anticipation and the fear. And I've got some ideas on that. I don't know if I want to voice them, but I thought that was a really interesting discussion. The one that I found most frustrating was the one that I did, difficult rules, which was table edges, because I'm absolutely convinced we could do something with a table edge. So, for example, you shoot at one of my sections, it gets a lot of shot, it retires off the table, but it's only an inch off table. But because it's an inch off table, it's in another dimension. And I'm sure we could do better with that.
Yeah, I think it's a real frustration, isn't it? And I think it's one of those set ways of thinking that we've got in the hobby that's just the way it is. We create this artificial box for us to play our games in, and we just expect, that we're going to do it in a certain way. So if we can challenge some of that, I think that's really exciting. That's the kind of projects I want to be involved in. And Sid, your night fighting thinking, the jungle, interesting. We talk about the jungle as well, being the jungle belongs to the enemy until we realize it's just as useful for us as it is for them. And it's a bit like the night. Night's the same kind of thing, isn't it? So some interesting principles we can apply across those too, perhaps.
Yeah, there's some really interesting crossovers there. I mean, they're both environments that you'd immediately think would create an attritional factor as regards visibility and organization. But through military history, there have been certain combatants who've taken advantage of that. So the Japanese naval aspects in between the wars and then World War II, and also right back to the Russo-Japanese War, seeing night as a real opportunity. And it's interesting that that's echoed to some extent in jungle warfare, isn't it, with the Japanese in World War II, but in particular the Australians and what they were doing in New Guinea as well, and how they were trying to use the jungle and reclaim the jungle as an environment in which they could be successful, which I know is something that you've both looked at in the Far East Handbook and in the campaigns that we've been playing in the Far East at the club in recent months.
And you can extend that to when you look at the First World War and when you look at the British Army's doctrine with regards no man's land. Our front line ends at the enemy's trench, as opposed to just saying, right, our front line ends at our front line and the stuff in between is no man's land. The British Army developed a very distinct doctrine that we own anything where the enemy is not present, and developed an extremely aggressive attitude towards patrolling that not all nations, by any stretch of the imagination, have replicated. And I think what the Australian Army did with its jungle warfare training was an extension of that, because the Australians had done particularly well in the Great War and come out of that with a lot of plaudits, as they quite rightly deserve. Talking of which, I got 2 packets of Anzac biscuits. My daughter came back from Australia, and if you want any of the best byproducts of the Great War, Anzac biscuit must be the best ones. But that's by the by.
Well, my daughter returned from the West Country loaded with a custard and yogurts, with loads of dairy products bursting out of the fridge.
That's fantastic. Well, I'll have to try those Anzac biscuits. I'd actually forgotten all about the Australians in the First World War and extending the comparison over to no man's land, but it's actually a really good one, and the way in which the British Army reclaimed that no man's land. And there's a couple of excellent books out there, which I think we've probably discussed before, about trench raiding and the whole philosophy of trench raiding. So that's a really good spot there. I'd completely forgotten that in recording the podcast. So in recording the Advent window.
Any strawberry flavoured yogurt, Nick?
There certainly are. Yes.
That could be a tribute to Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West. When he took on 2-ton Ted from Teddington, who drove the baker's van, he used a strawberry flavoured yogurt to send something spinning from Ted's hand.
Was it?
I'm not sure what it was. I think it could have been a scone. Yeah.
A scone.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, whatever it was, yes. No, that's in there. Strawberry yogurts are in there. My personal favourite is Madagascan vanilla flavour.
Oh, I love vanilla. Yeah.
Lovely. But you can't beat a good old tub of custard. I'll be tucking into that after my Christmas dinner.
That's quite bizarre. I thought we were having a conversation about night fighting. It turns out we're having a conversation about strawberry yogurt. Reminds me of a Christmas game we once had in which we had Doctor Who in the Indian Mutiny, and half the club was playing an Indian Mutiny game and the other half was playing the Christmas Doctor Who game. Just happened to be on the same table. I had that moment of flashback there.
Yes, indeed. Good old Christmas games from the past. We had some blasts, I'm sure. Up and down the country, there have been some great ones going on this week.
So turning it up back, or turning things back to the Advent window, I thought it was also interesting as regards what we're thinking about for Project 24, I think, as you described it, Richard. I mean, there were lots of good ideas coming out relating to buildings and Midgard. And Nick, I very much liked, and I'm sure a lot of people did, your ideas relating to Go Commando. Maybe this is a good time to sort of revisit some of the thoughts that we've had and some of the feedback I know we'll have had from the friends online relating to those suggestions.
Well, certainly the things we've been talking about night fighting are directly relevant to what we're trying to go to with Go Commando, and I've been out walking the dog in the run up to Christmas, listening to the Oddcast, and ideas bouncing around in my head of things that we could incorporate. Really want to make it something special and try and get some innovative ideas in there, and we've got some really nice ones that Rich and I are going to get together with early in the new year to see what survives that process of throwing out something that is a half-baked idea and seeing whether or not it gets through to the next round of thinking, or whether it goes straight in the bin. That's part of the process. Of course, the whole process, Go Commando itself, might end up in the bin. Yeah, that's the other side of it. We don't quite know where these things are ever going to end when we start them, but I'm really excited about it.
Once we get playtesting, Nick may end up in the bin. But we decided that we're going to go to a local game cafe and we're going to Go Commando right there on the table in the cafe, and we just thought let's just go loud and proud, out with it, let it all hang out in public. So I think what we'll probably do is I've got to get my LRDG stuff together, but I think we're probably going to start off with Nick's dockyard raid, because or at least a raid on an installation, because there's some fairly high density ideas that we want to get sorted in terms of stealth.
It's quite interesting at the moment because Rich is very much focused on the LRDG type of, driving through the gate and shoot everybody up kind of raid. And I'm much more focused on the sort of sneaky beaky, creep around at night and steal the blueprints kind of raid. So they're going to come together really interestingly, I think.
One of the things which really struck me, I mean, being there when you were doing the sort of progenitor of the raids, when I think it was at Market Lard during the course of the summer, when you had the dockyard out there and talking with both of you about these ideas. One of the things which really strikes me is that it's interesting that despite all the years we've been playing miniature war games, miniature historical war games, there's still things that we want to add into our games. There's still rules that we want to test out. There's still different approaches that we want to take. And the sort of the pinch raid aspect of trying to locate the general or the Enigma machine or the blueprints, it's a really nice way of actually looking at something in history which took place and taking it into a miniature wargaming environment. But again, there are echoes of that with different sort of games, and remembering that we are gamers as well as miniature historical wargamers. There's lots of different mechanisms in board games which we've been playing and we've been thinking about and enjoying over the last few years, which we can take and transport collaboratively to a miniature war games table.
There is a tabletop game, a board game out there at the moment, Sid. You're aware of it. It's what's it called? Orange. The Dutch. There's a game out there, Dutch Resistance. I'm really excited to have a play of that.
About Dutch ovens or something.
Yeah, not quite. But I'm really excited to have a play at that, because these things just stimulate your thinking a little bit, don't they? They just tickle your fancy.
It's got a Dutch name. It's something like Orange will withstand, or Orange will win in the end, or Orange will persevere and become victorious in the end. It's one of those, I think it's words that don't have an absolute direct translation into English type of thing. But yeah, it does look really good, doesn't it? Our friend Jur was playing that in the Netherlands the other week, and I think we've got a set of that winging its way to us, haven't we?
Hopefully we'll get our greasy little mitts on it before the mince pies have gone out of date.
It's a lager, not a tune. That's all I can say.
We have tasked great friend of the show, Yo de Jong, to try and locate a copy of that in the Netherlands. So hopefully we'll be getting our hands on that shortly. And it's an interesting sort of mechanism there, or the ideas behind that mechanism, that one thinks immediately of miniature war games as just fighting and people shooting at each other. But if you can marry the two together, a slightly more cagey game in respect of not being detected and using your skills of being able to move around the table and not be detected and not engage in combat, or perhaps have a diversionary attack on one side, again, it introduces something which is slightly different, which we perhaps haven't always done in the past, Richard.
It does. It introduces tedium. Creeping round a table where all I'm trying to do is creep over and blow up the bins, in a tribute to a good friend of ours in Caerphilly. And Nick is wandering around with an Alsatian going woof woof, and he's having a crafty cigarette going, I wonder what that noise is by the bins, is a bloody tedious game. So what you need to do is take that tedious aspect and take that out and introduce the excitement and the thrill and the suspense of that type of action, and how we translate that into a game and make it exciting and playable. Because I have played games like that where it's almost like a patrol phase, and you go through this patrol phase, for want of a better word, where I'm creeping about, you are the guards doing your patrol, and when that finishes, you go, thank Christ that's finished. Now we can get on with the shooting bit. And yeah, there's always going to be the bit that the action bit is going to be the most exciting. But what's going to be a real challenge is making that first part less of a tedious patrol phase and more of an integral part of the action.
It's got to be a suspense building phase, hasn't it? It's got to build the suspense without the tedium.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a challenge. Well, it will be a challenge.
So opening up that sort of game mechanism discussion to everyone on the Christmas Day Oddcast is a brave thing to do, but I think that's all part of the fun of sort of getting together and trying to work through ideas. Some of them make the final cut, but some of them are left on the cutting room floor, Nick.
One of the things I'm really interested in exploring, Sid, amongst this is the concept of daring. We talk about morale going up and down, but there's this concept of daring that you have. And we talk about things being daring and daring. What does that really mean? How do we really capture that in a game? What would I do that's daring? And how might that influence what the other side do? So I've got some ideas on that. We're not going to throw anything out there yet for public ridicule, but at some point we will.
Nothing about chirpiness, I hope.
No, the chirps are not dead, mate.
They are. That is a rule mechanism that will never see the light of day. That trip down the coast road of Belgium was one of the most bizarre experiences of my entire life.
Yeah, but trust me, it will resurface in another form. It might not look like that, but it's there. Dead men don't chirp. Fact.
That was the name of the rules you had on there. Yeah, well, fortunately, we never published that one.
Yet.
It was also good, I think, to see some of the projects that we'd really enjoyed during the course of the year getting a mention. That's always a nice thing to do at the end of the year. It's not just to look forward into the future. And as you probably heard on a couple of the Oddcasts, it's great to have new projects, but it's also great to finish projects and actually get things over the line, which we can be proud to sort of discuss in all the good things that happened, and also some of the more difficult things that we had to overcome as challenges. I mean, I really did like the dockyard which you produced, Nick, and but again, I remember you putting that together, and these aren't things that just always come together in the perfect form, just out of the bag. I mean, there's a lot of 2D printing, there's a lot of building, but also the designing of how those games work. I think that's a process of experimentation and play testing, isn't it?
I'm sure it is for most people, Sid. I know that you're a great planner. I enjoyed what you were saying about how you were planning your small game that you could take around, to have after work drinks and that kind of thing. And that's really interesting, because I know that you did apply a regime to that, and you thought really hard about what you wanted to have in there. With me in the dockyard, I had a vision in my head that had a bit of a structure, but then it kind of just ballooned, and I would see something and, like, very moth-like, somehow include that in the game as well. So I think both approaches can work.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And Richard, as regards your project of the year, I think we all enjoyed listening to that one.
I can't even remember what I said, to be honest with you. My brain was hanging out at the time. I don't even know what I was talking about.
It could have been anything, couldn't
It
it?
could have been.
How was the Boer War project for you this year, Richard? I think we all enjoyed seeing your medieval collection again.
Well, what did it? What kind of? What was it? Was it
Oh,
your
no idea.
CW stuff? Was it?
I've
like-
absolutely no idea.
I was rather hoping you'd remember.
Well, I'm hoping I remember many things, Sid, but a lot of them haven't come back to me yet.
All I've got on my carefully prepared script is talk to Richard about his project last year. Rather damning, isn't it?
I do know what it was, actually. I talked a little bit about my Beaver Las Vegas ghost town for What a Cowboy, which I had on display at Oozing Lard in Bedford. But then the other main part of the build, I can't remember what it was. I've absolutely got no idea.
One of the highlights for this year actually has been watching the What a Cowboy games go past on social media and seeing people enjoy those, and some of the crazy names that people are coming up with around their scenarios has been brilliant. And there's some absolutely drop dead gorgeous terrain knocking about, some really beautiful tables. That's been, it's been a real highlight. And we've got What a Gangster, of course, is the conversion for that in Lard magazine, where you can pack your Chicago typewriter, Sid, and your pinstripe suit. In fact, I don't know if you've seen the special yet, Sid, but you do make a guest appearance in that article.
You do, looking very much like George Melly.
At Sydney's random events table, if I recall.
Yeah.
So well worth a look.
I used to have a George Melly LP at one point. It was really quite good, but he was of my mind when it came to his tailoring. So razor glass to Mr. Melly here, much missed and departed from these parts.
Not Roger Melly.
Roger Melly was a very different sort of person. I don't ever aspire to be Roger Melly. George Melly, yes, always. Not Roger Melly.
Can I throw a question at this point, Sid? Because I went on Twitter and said that we were oddcasting earlier, and I've asked people to shout out a few things. And an interesting question coming from a friend of the show and your friend, in fact, Sid, for after work drinkies and wargaming, Des Dark in the Shadow Wars.
Desmondo!
The great Desmondo says, what wargaming history event did you miss in 2023 that you wish you'd attended? So, anything you missed that you really, we still miss Crisis, don't we, as a show?
Yeah.
You'd say that you really missed?
Yeah, I miss Crusade in Penarth in Welsh Wales in January. I don't know why. Whenever we went down to Wales, it never seemed that cold for January, and we always had a good time. And it's always good to see our Welsh friends, because there's a good Welsh coven of lardies down there. And Crusade always used to be a good opportunity to meet up with them and go out in Cardiff or Penarth.
I'll tell you what I missed.
It's a shame we missed that now.
There was a day that you and I were due to go down to Desi's, and you had a flat tire or something. We couldn't go. Do you remember there was something about your car was dead? And
I don't remember anything.
No, it wasn't. You weren't there. That's why it's me.
Right.
It's just another one of those things that you weren't invited to, Richard.
Well, unfortunately,
so
I remember them now.
I'd like to see myself in this Shadow War next year, Des.
The Shadow War's excellent, I have to say. So Des, his wife Gian very kindly invited us down a number of times during the course last year. I made it 2 or 3 times, but really would have loved to have gone down more times. I think there's lots of things that you miss certainly in retrospect. I mean, gatherings of people that you see the photos online. There's a big, as the kids would say, a big FOMO with wargaming Twitter, isn't it? The fear of missing out. I certainly felt that a little bit with We Have Ways, not being there and seeing the great effort you were making, although I'm not hugely a World War II sort of tank tread kind of guy. I think there's certainly an element I felt both years when you went over to Arnhem, and I couldn't really make either of those for various different reasons, work related and family holidays. But I think that I tried to get to everything that I wanted to see, but there's always more that I would have liked to have been able to attend. And the things that you miss are catching up with people, so missing games which look particularly good, or just gathering of various people. There's lots of different events that I've been really impressed with. Some of the things that Gareth has been putting on in Wales in his shed. And I know he's had, I'm going to get the names wrong, but I think Professor Rob Jones or Dr. Rob Jones over there, but also, you know, Jeff Bond and Welsh Jeff Davies as well, going over to the shed, and that looks fantastic. Some of those games that Gareth's been putting on have been absolutely fantastic, and it would be lovely one day to be able to get over to Abergavenny, possibly to participate in one of those. That would be a real treat if we're ever invited, of course.
Wise words, mate. Yeah. Okay. So sorry for that distraction. I'm getting a list of messages come up, so I might just flash them through now and then when we can. So excellent. Thank you for those of you who did send messages.
That's a very, very nice idea indeed. Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't thought of putting this on Twitter and asking people for an impromptu Ask Sydney, but it's a very good idea. So I think the next point of the show is really the very traditional part of Christmas, in which we look under the tree which is groaning with Christmas baubles and exciting lights to see what presents we've actually bought for each other.
Sydney Roundward. He's got red trousers.
And welcome back. Welcome back. Here we are. After wrestling with the Christmas tree to get the presents from under the branches, we've now retrieved each of our presents from each other from under the Christmas tree on Lard Island. So, Richard, these are yours. And Nick, these are yours. And I'll take these, which are mine.
Take my eye out with that.
So go on, Nick. You open the first one.
I open this first one for you, Sid. Right, I can. Which piece it's not? Oh, it's okay. It's a box size, A4 size box, more or less. Open the paper. What have we got here? Ooh, Sydney's been pushing the boat out for me. So I've got in here, ladies and gentlemen, a copy of an old Avalon Hill game that some of you might know of. It's called B-17, Queen of the Skies, which is hard to get hold of these days, Sydney. So you did a very good job at sourcing that. What interesting game this is. I like to play these different games, as you know, and this one is a solo game where you take a B-17 on a mission, and in fact on a series of missions. I think the idea of the game is that you complete your 25 missions, and each one, you know, you go through and you may or may not get attacked, etc., etc. And I just think it's been one I wanted to put in my collection for quite a while now. But I also think that it's particularly interesting at this time because we know that after Christmas, when we get into the new year, the much heralded Masters of the Sky program from, is it HBO, the same people that made Band of Brothers, are returning to give us the story of the 8th Air Force with Masters of the Sky. And I just get a feeling that this is going to be lots of interest around that kind of thing as you go into the new year. So playing some of those games looks great. There's also a great audio book, by the way, Mike Peters' book about the 8th Air Force, the title which escapes me at the moment, is available now on Audible. It's coming out, I think, on Boxing Day. I certainly got it on pre-order. So to listen to Mike, well, not listen to Mike, but whoever's doing the voiceover, I don't think it is Mike, and to be able to play this game as well is a great pairing. So thank you very much, Sydney. Queen of the Skies, you are indeed, and so's the game. Thank you very much, mate.
Well, I used to have that game in the 90s, and I think that must have been out around about the time of the Memphis Belle film, the film which is sort of based with Matthew Modine and a couple of those kind of young actors. But it's quite a nice game to play. It's a solo game, but I had a good few missions over Germany with it back in the day.
I'll bet you did. 1985, I think, might have been when it first came out. Looking at the date on this instruction book here, but it's a nice one, Sid. It's in quite good condition, so well done, mate. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I'll put that next to my Dallas roleplay game.
We do need to get out that Dallas roleplay game at some point.
Yeah, I want to be Sue Ellen.
Well, we all want to be Sue Ellen. That's the problem.
I think I have unique characteristics that will make me the best Sue Ellen available.
Well, maybe that's the question.
My go. None of your boring nonsense.
That's the advent calendar for next year, then, isn't it? Who'd make the best Sue Ellen? There we go. We can put that. What have we got, Rich?
I'm opening it up. It's a book size. It's a book size package. Hold on a minute. Bloody thing. Right. Here we go. Right. This is from Nicholas. Right. A book. I was right. It's a book and a film and a play. The Long Range Desert Group, History and Legacy by Carl Gunnar Norren and Lars Gyllenhaal. Which is great names that I can't pronounce. And it's all about the LRDG, their history and legacy. Now, it's an interesting book, as I've been told, that there's a lot of information in here specific about tactics. And I think that's something that's going to be really interesting in terms of developing some of the concepts of the Ghost Patrol type thing that I'm looking to do with Go Commando. So
imagine putting a campaign together of that kind of Ghost Patrol. That would be interesting, wouldn't it, as well? So it's going to stimulate lots of exciting ideas, that, mate. I think so. I hope you like it. Yeah,
very much so. Thank you. I've been buying some other books on the LRDG, and that looks great. That will really complement those. And I'm very keen on putting my stuff together. I bought, in their Black Friday sale, I bought my LRDG Force from Offensive Miniatures, and it's turned up and it's all metal cast vehicles, which actually I opened the box, looked at all the parts and shut the box again and done nothing about it since. But I need to sit down with some Evo stick multi-purpose impact glue and get that built over Christmas, and so we can get that on the table at some point in the new year. Really excited with that. So there's some festive reading for me there, not I'm allowed to read at the moment.
No, I was going to get you a pack of bands, but they're sold out. The sticks like shit, Rich, could you not use that for your LRDG Chevys?
I think it might be a bit excessive. Sticks like shit is great for putting great big things like sticking the skirting board on your wall, not for doing fine detail and putting a bumper on an LRDG.
I know, though, that when I built my Daimlers that I got from Romania, they were kind of resin kit.
Yeah, I
remember putting the whole axle and the wheel suspension together, and eventually ended up coating all of that with a whole load of that sticks like shit stuff, because it's the only way I'll get the whole thing to stick together. And I've got it on the underside of the vehicle, so who gives a that, does it?
I have to say, I'm not really designed to build metal vehicles like that, because what you have to do is you really have to get the chassis and stick the wheels on and then put it to one side for 2 days while it dries thoroughly. That's not me. I want to put all 57 parts on in a 10-minute period and then drive it around the tabletop, which you can't really do. So I need to gird up my loins and find some self-discipline before I start that.
You need to be a tiny bit more patient, Richard, in 24.
Right. I do, mate. Actually, I do. I think that's a good point. We can talk about that in our New Year. What do you call those things that you do at New Year? Oh, blimey, my brain is gone. Right. Yeah, that's right.
Open this one, Sydney. Here you go.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. This is quite a slim envelope.
You wouldn't
wow,
would you?
No expense spared.
No, I have a set, which actually I did mention to you a few weeks ago, of colour wheels. So these are lovely. These are 3 colour wheels, which are really nice. I've got one in a book before, but these are actually ones which rotate, so you can compare the different colours. What on earth am I talking about, listeners? There's a set of colour wheels which really enable you to find complementary colours on the different terms of the colour wheel and to look at little triads of colours which work together. I think some of the kids online on YouTube use these quite a lot, especially sort of painters who are doing what they call box art sort of painting. There's a couple of great painting podcasts out there, mainly in the Warhammer 40k arena. There's the painting phase and the paint perspective. Both of those are highly recommended, at least for me. And I think the guys on there often talk about colour wheels as being something which is really interesting to try and get harmonised figures. So I wanted to give that a go. So thank you very much for those. They are absolutely wonderful.
I'll tell you who uses colour wheels, and that's Jim Ibbotson.
That doesn't surprise me. It was exactly the
start.
Ibbotson sort of thing that I was thinking of when I saw those, although any emulation of Jim is not going to be possible. But I did think Jim might be the guy who would have those sort of things in his locker.
What does he match then, colour-wise? He tried to match his sleeping bag to the shop doorway that he's sleeping in.
Oh, half, mate, half.
Love you, Jim. Happy Christmas, mate. Love you, Jim. Love you. I mean, to be fair, Jim did some fantastic stuff this year. He did a British officer. I think of the Cuirassier he did this year. They looked tremendous stuff. So, well, Sid, I thought you could also do your lounge.
Nicola will be thrilled. Thank you for that.
Your panto outfit clearly didn't follow any of that. So I thought actually you need to coordinate your outfits a bit more neatly and a bit more creativity. So I hope you enjoy those, mate.
Thank you very much. That comes to a different point, isn't it, really? On a stage, everything needs to be more vibrant, so you don't necessarily want things which are harmonised. But I think the colour wheel can sort of help with that as well. That's part of a podcast for a different day. I think we should explore some of those ideas in 24, as they say. Anyway, for that, because Richard, I've got you a present now, so here we go.
Oh, it's another book. It's another book. Is this LRDG? Let's have a look. Oh, no. It is similar. Dragoons and Dragoon operations in the British Civil Wars, 1638 to 53. Well, that's interesting. Produced, excuse me, by, I believe it's by Helion, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the Soldier series.
Yeah.
And in many ways, there are some parallels there, aren't there? The way Dragoons operated in the Civil War, they were the ones operating away from the main armies. They were the ones going out foraging. They were the ones heading out, undertaking daring raids into the enemy's rear quarters. So there's parallels there. And of course, for absolutely perfect for in the buff, which is something that we are very definitely going to be getting that back onto the table in early next year as well. Sydney.
I think one of the really interesting things I thought of was that it would be perfect for in the buff. But Dragoons, I think, are some of the most unloved sort of characters on a war games table. I always remember in the sort of 80s and 90s playing Renaissance games, and Dragoons were utterly useless because they were sort of musketeers on horseback. So they were just crumped down and clumped over by Polish winged hussars and that sort of thing. They were laughing stock. But of course, whenever you play a campaign game, the Dragoons are absolutely the most important figures there. They can sort of can move, they can forage. A key sort of component of 17th century Dragoon work was foraging, extolling contributions, taking tolls on roads, especially done in the Spanish Netherlands. The French Dragoons were rapacious in moving through the Netherlands right up to Utrecht and Amsterdam in the 1670s. And in the English Civil War, it's a really, really useful troop type to have. So I thought it's perfect for in the buff, absolutely perfect. Looking at Dragoon tactics, very legitimate, Richard.
I totally agree. One of my first metal armies ever was English Civil War 15mm when I was a teenager, and I bought 15mm minifigs. But I did the Dragoons last because what I hated about them was you had to paint two lots of figures for one unit. You had to paint them mounted and dismounted. So I put it off to the very, very end, and I used a different company for them. They weren't minifigs. I don't think minifigs did them. And I can't remember the name of the company, not that it's relevant at all. But yeah, and I don't think I ever painted the mounted version, only the dismounted version ever, which was fine for the big battles that I was doing then. But really, as you say, they come into their own when they're when they're in other types of operations. Nicholas.
Yeah, and an associated point that I've got from one of the listeners who's messaged in, Reese Greg Humphrey has messaged in to say, Merry Christmas, one and all. I hope your dinners are dripping with top-notch lard. When are you going to do a set of rules for the Renaissance period? So, Rich, when are we going to do it? January, February, March, April, May? When are we going to do a set of rules for the Renaissance period?
Who knows?
Who knows? Maybe one day in the future.
Yeah.
I had dragoons in them. Did they have dragoons in Renaissance times? I suppose, sort of.
Yeah, that was the real creation point of the dragoon, the 1640s in France and the English Civil War. Yeah, they're really coming into their own, and sort of like following on from troops like the Reiters of the 16th century. But the dragoons of their own sort of 17th century flavour, really, named after the dragonards of the Louis XIV in the south of France. But that's another bit of history tossed into the Oddcast in a wayward sort of fashion.
That's great. I've been watching Christmas University Challenge. I'll try and keep that in my head.
It's pretty unlikely you're going to get a question on that, to be honest. Anyway, whose presents is next? Who hasn't had two?
I've got presents. I've got two presents from Richard here. So I'm going to
favoritism there.
Yeah,
it's favoritism. Favorite child
there. Hello. Oh, do you hear that? Do you hear that?
I thought you'd like that.
Yeah, very, very funny. What am I holding in my hand, Sid?
A pair of bollocks.
A pair of bollocks. 2 bottles of De Koning, De Bollica De Koning, all the way from Belgium, possibly. There is a story here. Richard, would you like to admit your guilt at this point and share your story with the listeners?
Yeah, I will do. When we went to Arnhem, we met up with some great friends from Belgium, Sam and Vincent. And Sam very kindly bought me some bottles of Crystal beer, which I enjoyed and drank. And he also bought some bottles of De Koning for Nick, because Nick is particularly fond of those. And Sam gave them to me to pass on to Nick. And Nick was the operative word, because I nicked them and drank them and actually used them for cooking.
Sam's I've left you some beers with Richard. Oh, thanks, Richard. I'll pick up those beers. Next thing I know, Richard is cooking a soft pork belly marinated in the beer that Sam gave him for me.
Yeah.
So this is restorative.
It is payback.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you've admitted your guilt and given me that. But there's something else here which also looks like a book. So let me see what this means. Right. So this okay. So I can drink me De Koning, and I can excellent. Right.
Colour in your book.
Yeah, Britain's Band of Brothers by Tom Keane. Forward by Major General Julian Thompson, CBOBE. Which is about the formation of cross-channel raiders, small raiding groups that did sneaky beaky type attacks across the northwestern European theatre. This looks a really good book, actually. Nice little guy.
Of course, it's a good book. I don't like rubbish.
Well, no, it looks good. The History Press. It looks excellent. Section on commando training, raiders, medals, assault on passage to Africa. Okay, that looks really interesting. So that's by Tom Keane, Britain's Band of Brothers. Thanks, mate. That's going to set the scene quite nicely for what we're going to do next year. Okay, well, Sid, I think you've still got a parcel left, haven't you?
Splendid. Yes, it looks like another book, and as I open
glad to see somebody keeping the book supplies of the world.
It is another book. So this is fantastic. Thank you very much. It's quite a heavy book. It seems to be published on very heavy paper, which I can't understand why. It's not a huge book, but it's one of those American books. It's very heavy.
I know you're a very superficial person, Sydney, and if I bought you a gift that was pretty lightweight, you would think of it as a lightweight gift. So I actually selected that on the basis that it had the heaviest paper I could find.
Well, that is wonderful. That is wonderful. But
because the book has weight, you would consider it to have gravitas.
Well, how right you are, because it's written by Professor Thomas Donald Conlon, and it's called State of War, the Violent Order of 14th Century Japan, because those of whom have listened to the Christmas Eve Advent window will know that I am wanting to go big in Japan during 24 and using the mechanisms which we've been working on relating to in the buff to have a think about doing the same in 14th century Japan in the Nambokucho Wars, a war which is very, very important in Japanese history, but so obscure most people in Japan don't know about it, let alone people here. Richard, questions?
Will everybody be kung fu fighting?
No, they'll be big in Japan tonight. Be tight where the eastern sea's so blue, all right, as they say, or said in the 1980s. It'll be great. It'll be great. It'll be like a Japanese version of In the Buff, but very different sort of fighting, because whereas in the civil wars in England, you had the breakdown essentially of authority between the king and parliament, in the Japanese civil wars, you had something similar happening in the 14th century between what's called the Northern Court and the Southern Court. But it follows a period of quite intense sporadic fighting in the previous centuries where there was strong central authority, but war was sanctioned. So it's a different kind of civil war, really, but very interesting, which hopefully we'll be able to have a few games of that as I get the figures painted over Christmas and the New Year.
Do they have a Midlands court?
They did not. They did not. No, it's just the Northern and the Southern court.
Right. So does Japan have a version of Humberside?
Well, that would be unique, wouldn't it? Because, of course, even the United Kingdom doesn't now have Humberside anymore. It is, of course, East Yorkshire, which is my natural native county.
Humberside, mate. You're from Humberside.
It doesn't exist anymore. It's like saying you come from Rutlandshire.
No, Rutlandshire does exist. You're from the Midlands, mate. That's the point they're making.
We shouldn't. Why spoil this festive cheer by such nonsense? Let's move on to a much less controversial topic, because we do have a vote to undertake here.
Oh, yes.
2024 is potentially in the United Kingdom.
Hold on. Is this time for a jingle for the defenestration of lard?
Well, it would have been.
Right. Well, let's have it now.
The defenestration of lard.
Right, carry on.
Fantastic. Well, 2024 in the United Kingdom is the year potentially of a very important election, but we're not talking about the general election because, you know, before the 2024 starts, we have our very own election here for which of the defenestration of lard advent windows would be our winner. So we have 3 contestants, I think. Or
no,
3.
Actually, I think we have 2 contestants because one of the contestants was so bleeding rubbish, nobody was consider voting for it.
Well, the reason that he's so defensive about your window, Sid, is that actually what he would be defenestrating is himself. He would have to be defenestrated. If we chose to go with your window, Sid, which was about people who pick up big groups of figures with their big fat sausage hands, he'd be the first one out the bleeding window.
I have very elegant fingers, the fingers of a pianist, I've been told.
Sid, you should remind the listeners, in case they missed it, in case they fell asleep during one of your advent calendar windows, what was it that you put in for the defenestration of lard?
My defenestration of lard was the claw, the hand-like claw which descends on people's carefully painted and varnished figures, collecting not just one, but several at the same time, rather than picking them up neatly by reference to just their bases, which were also varnished and extra wide, because I know Richard's predilection for just picking up the figures by their heads or swords.
Oh, so this was actually aimed at me, was it?
Not
so there am I with a life-threatening illness, and all you can find time to do is criticise me with a highly personal attack.
Well, as you both know, all my Oddcasts with Advent windows were recorded in November. So unless I was clairvoyant, I wouldn't have known you were clearly at death's door by the time you heard it.
I think you're more Claire Rayner, but that's another issue.
But the thing is, Sid, you see, I don't really like to support your idea over mine, Sid, but the truth about your idea is that actually, when I was making my cockleshell hero canoes for my Games of Go Commando, I'm thinking these are never going to survive contact with Richard Clark. I've got these paddles that are sticking up in the air, and you just know that within 3 seconds, oh, that's broke. Oh, that's come off. Oh, there, that's no good. Yeah. What more can I say, Sid? I think yours has got a really strong case. We've all seen it. People, I do it. I even do it myself sometimes with metal figures because I think it's okay. But you get upset if people pick it up by the base. If you don't pick it up by the base, isn't that right?
I prefer the bases to be picked up. Obviously, that's what they should be picking up. I love the fact that we are now Clark proofing our participation games for the club and for the shows. I do like that idea. Maybe there's room for our beloved friends at War Bases to create a Clark proof 5 or 6 millimeter MDF base. Diana, Martin, and Glenn, if you're listening, perhaps that's one for you for 24.
Well, maybe one for my lawyers in 24 as well, because this is clear slander.
I think the first thing to do with your war games room to make it Clark proof is put some foam over the radiator in case you on it again.
Underfloor heating. I'd like to see you brain the floor to try and damage that. But enough of this nonsense. Because there were other contenders for the defenestration of Lard as well. We had points systems and we had competition wargaming. 2 close cousins, not that far apart.
We didn't have competition wargaming. I was very careful not to name competition wargaming. What I said was, and this is putting it in short order, is shit games at shows that look like a big bucket of dog's vomit.
That's a strident view expressed by you there, Richard.
Well, do you know what? I saw a photograph. Somebody sent me a photograph from a war game show recently, and they were playing. It was a competition game. Oh, surprise, surprise! Quelle horreur! And it was the entire table was 2-dimensional. The hill on it was represented just by a piece of flat cloth, and there was a town on it which was completely flat, but was a top-down view of roofs of buildings. And you just think, hold on a minute, this is just ridiculous. It's just awful. No effort had gone into it whatsoever.
Well, that's what a map is. That's a map. That's called a map, isn't it?
It's called a map. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, but maps are well-established, good places to hold a war game on.
All right, then it's clearly I've lost, and Sydney, people who've got jammy fingers has won.
No. What's won is points.
Well, hold on, points
should be defenestrated. Nobody likes points. Points are a mockery of history. They make a mockery of history, and anything that makes a mockery of history should be thrown on the rockery.
But put the mockery on the rockery. Points are useful when putting together a game. We use points in Chain of Command, for example.
What you don't like, Nick, what I would suggest that you might not like is even pointed games without scenarios which delineate between the forces and use the points to create more of a depth between the different sides.
Sydney, you could be my brief anytime. Yes, absolutely. That is exactly it, Your Honour. I refer the gentleman to the answer he just gave.
Shame you didn't say that in the first bleeding instance then, isn't it, really? Oh, yeah, well...
that's what Sid's for. What you don't ever, that's what Sid's for, isn't it? To make sense of our gobbledygook.
That is probably true.
Well, I have my own gobbledygook. Don't worry about it. So, which is the worthy winner? Do we have equal point systems without the scenario reflecting that? Do we have games which? How did you put it, Richard? It was so elegantly described. Perhaps you could do that again for us.
Well, of course, memory is an issue here, but I think that's something like games that are so awful they look like a big bucket of dog's vomit.
Yeah, but I think we've all put those games on.
You certainly have, mate. Well, no, I disagree, because I think what the point I was making were games not that looked rubbish, because we've all put on games that look rubbish because we've tried our best and they just didn't look good, but games where no effort was taken. And I made the point of making that perfectly clear. It's where no effort is taken to make something look good. Now, I think they have a truly negative impact on the hobby, because people coming in contact with the hobby the first time are going to go, bloody hell, that looks awful, as opposed to saying, bloody hell, that looks brilliant, which is what they should be saying at games at shows. Now, I don't mind people playing games that look rubbish at home. I don't mind people doing it behind closed doors at a competition in a school gym where there's no members of the public present. But what I object to is people putting on games where no effort has been put into them when they're doing so at a War Games event where the general public are coming through the doors. Now, fine if you disagree with that, but I think that actually does some serious damage to the hobby.
Well, it's hard to disagree with that as a.
Of course it is, because it makes bloody sense.
Well, we all want games to look fantastic. We want people to be excited and inspired and thrilled when they walk in the door of these shows. So there is definitely something in that. They wouldn't necessarily know if a game was balanced on points or not, but they could probably tell from the faces of the miserable bastards that were stuck playing a points balanced game if they were. So well,
equally, if people went into Salute and there was I playing Sydney's wonderful game and happened to be picking up 3 figures at once with my fingers covered in jammy Dodger content, nobody would go, oh, that's completely ruined my show. I'm not going to take up wargaming because that bloke had jammed sandwiches and was picking up figures.
But Richard, you know full well that if you want to have your toys in good condition after the event, and the more we go towards 3D printing and the use of plastics, the more likely it is that Mr. Sausage Fingers is going to break something. It's really hard for us to have really nice, pretty tables that are robust enough to survive that assault from that person who's still got concussion, maybe, and can't pick things up without gripping them like they're gripping a.
No names, no pack drill.
Yeah, no names, no pack. Our beautiful games would soon be destroyed by that person, and what you'd find is that people say, I'm not going to bother putting effort in to this game to make it look beautiful and have lots of nice things in it, because Mr. Sausage Fingers is going to come and destroy it. So I'll just provide a flat map that he can't destroy. So what we need to defenestrate is
the sausage fingers.
I think we should defenestrate the sausage fingered wargamer.
I think that's a rather pointed suggestion.
So no more grabbing hands, grabbing all that they can. Then in 2024, we've defenestrated that.
I think we should. That would be. I would be happy to see that go out the window.
It's 2 against 1, Rich. 2 against 1. Looks like you've
lost.
Well,
in that case, I shall commit Harry Kiri at the end of this podcast and hope that the spirit lives on in these big battle bonsai bonkers games.
If you're going to commit Harry Kiri, don't try to do it with a 3D printed sword, because you probably smash the blade.
That's right. I'm just going to go for another radiator.
They're much less brittle, aren't they, Rich?
Yeah, they're certainly less brittle than my head.
Wonderful. Well, I wonder what joys we'll have to defenestrate next year when we play the defenestration of Lard again.
Well, the way it's going, there might just be 2 of you doing it. I'll be long gone.
Wonderful. Well, that almost wraps us out, but I think we do have 1 or 2 more very kind suggestions which should be made on Twitter. Nick, I know as our social media guru, you've kept your eyes on these. What has your and Richard's adoring public had to ask you this morning?
Just a few messages that come through on the Twitter feed that's worth sharing for people. Joe, the Wargamer, Joe Bilton over in Watford says, Happy Christmas, Merry Christmas to all. Mention Hearts of Lard in March, he says. So I've just done that. Good to see that Rich is holding his head together. He says, David Hiscots, who's written a great pint-sized campaign in Lard magazine, says, Merry Christmas. May your Christmas be full of lard. Simon at 5 Rounds Rapid, Happy Christmas, Lardies. Greg, the artist, Happy Christmas, all of you, who's coming over to mine for a drink. Now, Greg did an interesting piece in Lard magazine about basing, which is really nice and some good ideas. We've got, can't read them all out. John Savage writes some old rubbish again. Here, so what does he say? Merry Christmas, gents. Dominic in Bavaria, frohe Weihnachten to all Lardies from Bavaria. So I don't know, that's saying all Lardies from Bavaria, or from Bavaria to all Lardies. Ken Riley says, "I'll eat Merry Christmas all." We've got Merry Christmas to you all and the whole Lardy community, says Dan SW87. If asked to sit on Santa's questionable lap and ask a question, did I hear mention of a TFL Cold War game in the works?
He did, yeah, he did. That's being run by Peter Rossetti down in Melbourne, in Australia. Australia, we love you. Amen.
John Steed,
we're going to be looking at doing more on that in the coming year.
John Steed says, "Merry Christmas to all the Lardies." Tom McKinnell says, "God bless us, everyone." And I think at the time of reading out, that's all the ones that have come in. So some nice messages there from across the world of Lard, from us to you, wherever you may be, or indeed are.
Oh, yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, that wraps up really another year of Lard, complete with Oddcasts and Advent calendars.
Disney.
Why are you waving at me? Why are you both waving?
Talking about calendars, Sydney, we've got one more thing under the tree for you, haven't we, Richard?
We have. And you tell them, mate. You tell them.
Well, we thought that this year, due to the popular demand and knowing that the growing millions of fans that you have across the world, Sydney, we have at the moment one photograph of you that has been available for people to get when they've been to various live events. But this year, as a special treat to the community of Lard, we have created for a short time only a Sydney Roundwood 2024 calendar that will be available to download from the TooFatLardies website for a small price.
Yeah.
And the price, that all the money that we generate from the sale of the Sydney Roundwood 2024 calendar will go to charity, mate.
The Sydney Roundwood New Trouser Fund. No, we're gonna charge £1 to download a PDF. 12 images of Sydney, a 2024 Sydney Roundwood calendar for you to print out at home, put up on your wall. And my top tip is just print it out one page at a time at the start of each month and have it up there on the wall so you can gaze at a different image of Sydney every month. So the Sydney Roundwood 2024 calendar available, £1 only, and all of the money there will go to Combat Stress. We're putting it all to our chums at Combat Stress. So let's see if we can raise a decent amount of money. It's a pretty shoddy calendar, to be honest with you. I mean, we have to mention Gareth in Wales, who's put together a load of photo montages, would be the best way of describing it. But I think any fan of Sydney Roundwood, any lover of the Roundwood brand, will be glad to have this above their mantelpiece, probably.
What a terrifying thought.
That is our gift from Lard Island to the Lard
world. To the world.
Can't complain too much because it's for charity, but I should be scrutinising each page with my attorneys and solicitors, eager to arraign you in any court of the land, but I know it's for a good cause. So
charity, mate, charity.
Well, what a horrifying end to the year, but hopefully that raises a bit of money for our great friends at Combat Stress, who do such wonderful, excellent, and actually very important work. Well, that is about time for it. Do we have any announcements? I don't think we do, because we'll probably pick those up in the new year and say where we may be going next. But I think it is a good time for us all to say a wonderful thank you and warm thank you to all of our listeners during the course of the year, and to wish you all a really very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy New Year to everybody out there. Thank you so much for being with us on this ridiculously exciting and lunatic journey through time and space.
So it's Merry Christmas and Happy New Year from me and Mr. Sausage Fingers.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
In tonight's show, Sydney Roundwood, joined by Nicholas Skinner and Richard Clark. Music by Roger Barraclough and his band.